आज की ताज़ा खबर। बेंगलुरु में रहने वाले लू और अमेरिका में रहने वाले सिड आपसे कुछ बात करना चाहते हैं। संगीतकार राजेश के साथ आपका स्वागत है लूसिड में।
What's going on, people? I'm Lou, and there's no Sid, and we are Lucid. Welcome to the second episode of the Minicast. It's been a long time since all of you saw my face, so yeah, nice to see you guys. And we have a guest today with us in the Minicast, which is Arjun Gargeyas. You have seen him before in the podcast in season, I think, 2, if I'm not wrong. Yeah, I think season 2. And welcome, Arjun, to the podcast again.
Hey Lou, nice to be here without Sid for once. It's it's a good place to be at right now. So let's talk about whatever you want to talk about.
Wow, it's a good place to be at right now without Sid. I like that line. Anyways, so the reason I've called you to the podcast today is to talk about a specific industry that both of us have affiliations to, which is the semiconductor industry. I have worked in the semiconductor industry. We both studied together about semiconductors, and now you work in semiconductor policy after having worked in semiconductor companies. Now, the reason I want to bring this topic up is because yesterday in ISB there was Ashwini Vaishnav who visited us in Hyderabad, and he had an interactive session with students. And that time I had asked him a question about how successful the 2021 semiconductor policy has been in terms of the design ecosystem growth in India. And well, his answer. Well, apart from that, I also asked him about the DLI scheme, which kind of has the 51% Indian ownership, etc. So his answer to it was that it has been a resounding success. He said that a lot of other nations are looking at India now. They're keen and watching India. He said that at the end of October, there will be kind of a push for the first agreement to be signed on a fab. By the end of December, there will be a fab, and by next year, we will have the first chip from India. And this is some very, I don't know, this sounds like a very ambitious timeline, but that is why I wanted to have this conversation with you today, because you work in this realm, okay, and I wanted to know how his answers align with what you kind of think is happening in the world and in India. So my first question to you is, why this discussion about semiconductors at all? Like, why is everyone talking about semiconductors so much? What happened?
Yeah, I think that dates back to around 2 years back, right? So when the COVID pandemic hit, there was already a decline in the chip production across the world, and when global supply chains were impacted due to the pandemic, one of the major industries which were hit was the semiconductor industry, and that was because it's such a hyper linked industry in terms of um, the number of actors involved and the number of dependencies which have been there. So there is an interesting map which I saw when I was just getting into the field of policy making, and then it showed how a particular chip, right, from the the part wherein it's actually designed, the architecture, and all the way until it's packaged and it's manufactured and it's shipped, it crosses international borders like some 10 times, and it just keeps going around and around. And this is because the fact that it cannot be done in one single location, and because each state around the world has its own strengths in the industry, and different states are well versed in different parts of their supply chain itself. So if you take Taiwan, then it's majorly manufacturing and fabrication. If you take US, it's majorly design, and they own EDA tools like Cadence and Synopsys. And then if you take Japan, they make this photoresist and stuff which are actually used during manufacturing. Even Netherlands, ASML, and they make photolithography equipment which are very very important while actually fabricating a chip. So there are so many dependencies in this entire supply chain, right? So when the COVID pandemic hit and the supply chains were disrupted, this was the fallout for the semiconductor industry was absolutely phenomenal, and we can still see that because the ongoing global chip shortage is just, I don't know when it's going to end. So there have been talks about the fact that it'll end, the production is back to normal, this, that, nothing. And major sectors have been affected. Automobiles, for example, Ford had to close down some of its factories because they did not have enough chips to actually get into those cars. So these kind of uh, economic devastation which was caused to the industry because of the pandemic itself and the hypersensitivity of the supply chain was brought the focus on semiconductors. One more thing is, of course, China itself, and the fact that they've been growing a lot in the industry. They've been trying to get into all sorts of like areas of the supply chain. They're trying to manufacture, they're trying to build advanced fabs in their own country, and they're trying to capture market space from the others. And there is also this thing about there might be aggression towards Taiwan across the Taiwan Straits, especially after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And the most lucrative industry that Taiwan has to offer is the semiconductor industry. So there have been fears that what if this falls into the hands of the Chinese. I mean, those are some things which are far away, and it's more or less just a reason to focus on the industry itself. But like these factors are just everything. When it combines together, there's the geopolitical factor, there's the economic factor, there's the technological factor with different states trying to get into the supply chain itself, because everyone wants to be a part of it. Vietnam wants to have now has different packaging and testing and assembly facilities because they can that's their comparative advantage. They have low skilled labor and they can use that to their advantage. So with all this happening, there was indeed a focus on it, and especially with the Quad and with the different international collaboration happening. So the focus on semiconductors became even more enhanced. So that is the basic gist of it. But again, we can delve more into it.
Okay. So, according to you, is this industry, the entire supply chain of this industry, is it highly fragile or is it highly efficient? I mean, I think there's this thin line between the two, and where do you think it lies?
I think in terms of fragility, it is fragile because of the dependencies it has created itself. So now that Taiwan owns 60% of all the manufacturing in the world, right? So now if one day if actually the Chinese invade Taiwan and they eventually take over the industry and they completely stop it from functioning on a large scale. So can the industry survive at that point of time with only the rest of the manufacturing output other than Taiwan, which exists right now? That's a question you can't answer, but it veers towards saying, oh no, they might not be able to do it because they're overly dependent on Taiwan. So in terms of that, there is fragility. But in terms of efficiency, yeah, because of the fact that there is so many actors and so many companies, there are so many stages as part of the production itself, from the design to the manufacturing to the assembly, testing, packaging, all of it combining to give one chip. So, and I mean one chip in the sense like they'll do it on a multiple and large scale, wherein a lot of
Got
them
it.
get produced. But either ways, to just for one chip, you just have to undergo all those phases, right? And the fact that they've been doing it till now without having to kind of rely on externalities such as what if there is only an economic boom, then only we can be more efficient. It's not like that, right? It has not been like that because it's been functioning for almost 40 years, almost 40 years now, since the 80s 90s.
Right.
So in terms of that, yeah, because of the fact that there are so many actors and involved and they're all working in tandem together, they have been efficient. But no one can disregard the fragility which exists because of the dependency some things have which have been created. So especially even in EDA tools, right, like Synopsys and Cadence have such a monopoly.
Mm-hmm.
Like if this if US says okay, they can't they cannot issue licenses to any other company in the world except US companies. You think I mean, like, that time the entire design ecosystem in India will just crumble because
Right.
they can't get any access to these tools,
Mm-hmm.
because these are the tools which are used to design chips. And in that way there is it is extremely fragile and prone to these kind of external factors which can which can determine its efficiency. So that's something.
So, okay, given that you did speak about the design ecosystem in India, and given that I did ask the Honorable Minister that question, my question to you is, what is India currently doing to get into this bandwagon of the semiconductor kind of? Everyone's opening their eyes now. They're seeing the inefficiencies, not inefficiency, probably the fragility in the system and the monopolies that is existing. What is India doing? Where is India going? What do you think the future is?
I mean, if we look at a SWOT analysis of India's semiconductor ecosystem itself, right, you can easily figure out that the design phase is the strengths or the comparative advantage for India. Because I mean, we both can relate to it because we were electronics engineers and we ended up being on the market for a couple of years, working in semiconductor industries itself, semiconductor companies themselves. So every year you have a large workforce which is coming in. I mean, which is there's a large workforce already, and there are multiple students, thousands, maybe 10,000 students who are just getting added on into the workforce every year. Uh, and also the fact that I guess most of the major semiconductor companies have their design houses in India. And you can corroborate this because Texas second most biggest center is in
Right,
Bangalore.
right.
So
Second biggest R&D. Yeah.
yeah, so Texas Instruments has uh, in words, I would say, like they have kind of bestowed upon the part of design to the Indian workforce itself, and they're happy with the work they're doing, and this will continue for a while now. So in terms of that, you can see that the design ecosystem in the country is thriving, but the only um, like pain point here is the fact that the majority of the people who are working in this field, in the design field itself, are working for MNCs. They're not working for Indian companies. So Indian companies itself, Indian domestic companies itself, do not have such a big presence. Not even a big presence. They don't have much of a presence. And the fact that this is an industry wherein you rule on IP, right? And when you build intellectual property in certain domains, that's when you kind of establish yourself as one of the de facto leaders in that domain. So the DLI scheme which was released last year was meant to do that, because in terms of the fact that they wanted to support specific design semiconductor design startups to create their own IP and build upon whatever they have right now. So in that way, yeah, even though the design phase is India's comparative advantage, there is this whole thing about not supporting the local industry enough, and that is where the last year's package came in. But one of the major things that any package from the last 20, 30, even 40 years is building a fab in the country. That is the manufacturing aspect of it. It has been tried, tested, failed multiple times. And now whatever small fabs India has right now, they don't have any commercial fab, first of all. They have only fabs which
Research fabs.
yeah, which are research fabs or operating under government departments. There is that Sitar fab, and then there is that gallium nitride fab,
Right.
and there's also the semiconductor laboratory in Chandigarh, which is under the Department of Space, and they just cater to the space industry and space requirements right now. So they don't have any commercial fab itself, and they've tried to build it. They've tried to attract investments for a long time. It hasn't happened yet. So I mean, that's the thing, right? It's not just investments. There is so many things which is it's like a chain reaction. So e- once you get investment, you should also ensure that you get the required equipment for manufacturing, and this includes photolithography
Right.
equipment
All
and
of it.
all of that. So in the on that fact also, India has not joined the ITA, which is the Information Technology Agreement, wherein there is a free flow of technology goods uh, across borders. So they still have import restrictions on it, on different goods, not just like semiconductor manufacturing, but different technology goods itself. And once you get that, there is also this whole thing about you need skilled labor. You need skilled labor to operate these machines. It's not something like other like in large scale industry manufacturings wherein it's all automated, or it's all like it's all like assembly lines or something like that, right? So there is this requirement of skilled labor. So but again, they haven't been able to attract human capital. uh, I don't Everyone from India wants to go to the US, but no one
Right.
from US wants, no semiconductor designer or even a semiconductor manufacturing startup from the US wants to come to India and set up their whole thing, because it's just a reasons, right? There's that red tapeism, bureaucratic involvement, and there is no state support. I mean, state government support. That The whole concept of uninterrupted power and water supply. So there are just huge number of factors which have contributed to not getting a fab in the country. So when Mr. Ashwini Vaishnav said that there would be a fab which would come up in the country by the end of the year, it seems to, I mean, it's an optimistic scenario, but we do not know whether what kind of things.
What kind of capacity the fab will have
Yeah,
and what it will cater to.
yeah, we do not know anything about that. And what is it this time that is different from the last 30 years, right? So that's something we might have to ask, because we have not succeeded in the last 30 years. What might be the cause for this time, the success this time? So, and that is why everyone, including us, said that no, look, you do not have to focus just on the manufacturing aspect. You have other areas of the semiconductor supply chain you can focus on, which includes the design and also the OSAT or the ATMP, which is basically outsourced assembly and test, because those are the ones wherein less investment is required, and you're okay with low skilled labor, which India has abundantly, and the fact that you can build it in a lesser period of time, and you can attract even Taiwanese giants such as Foxconn and all that to come assemble their products in this country. I mean, iPhone SE is assembled in India, right? So why not anything else? So um, that was also a conversation which was happening. And but again, it's in terms of this whole concept of strategic autonomy, strategic interests, and whatnot. The government still feels that, look, we need to have a fab in our country to make us self-sufficient. I mean, that's the whole concept behind it. But Do you think we'll really be self-sufficient with just one fab? Because you can't. There are so many other dependencies which are there in the entire supply chain, and also the fact that how much can you supply to the domestic market, right? There is no domestic market in the country which would actually buy the chips you produce. You end up having to export most of the chips you produce, even though there's a fab in the country, right? And you will be competing on the international markets at that time. Can you compete with the likes of TSMC and UMC, or even Samsung, to export chips abroad? So these are the questions which we need to answer. So that's something India, I mean, the whole concept is like that's what these guys have been trying to look at in terms of not just focusing on one area or part of the supply chain, but in the overall aspect. And they have also included, like the international cooperation. That's in terms of, we can see it in terms of the Quad, which is the Quad supply chain, semiconductor supply chain initiative. That's the countries, India, US, Japan, and Australia, which are looking to counter, or not even counter, basically just try to build redundancy and resiliency in the semiconductor supply chain, ensuring that China does not have a leverage. I mean, they say that it's not just China driven, but it's clear that there is this whole fear of Chinese investments and Chinese manufacturers taking over the market, slowly taking over market share. And you can see that a lot. I mean, like recently I wrote a piece wherein I talked about how the post-pandemic rise of China and the semiconductor industry has been visible, and the fact that the sanctions by the US themselves are a result of that, first of all, because they feel that once we are sanctioned, that means that we have to do everything on our own and we can figure it out. And they've done. And also the fact that they're tapping into these niche markets. They're tapping into AI chips, AI-enabled chips, wherein you do not need leading edge nodes such as 5 nanometer or 7 nanometer technology. They do not have capability for that either. So they're tapping into niche markets such as AI chips, which will still work with 65 nanometer tech, and which they have the capability to manufacture and fabricate. So in terms of that, they have been rising, and that is why this whole international cooperation behind securing the semiconductor supply chain itself. So India's initiatives are both domestic and the international, like in geopolitical or whatever you can call it. So
I can probably call it a very geopolitically strategic kind of investments that India is making more than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, strategic is this word. One of my colleagues keeps telling me that strategic is a word which people use when they do not know what else to put in. So,
wow, very nice.
So
all right.
They mean anything and everything. So that's why.
Okay. So thank you so much, Arjun, for this very quick discussion. It did clarify some thoughts that I had in my mind. We started off from a very optimistic scenario to a very, very we went down to pessimistic lanes, and then now we're back to really figuring out what the questions are for the future. And thank you so much for coming. Thank you, people, for listening and tuning in for the second episode of the Minicast. Do follow us on all the channels. I'm Lou, and there's no Sid, and we are Lucid.